So on behalf of conservatives and actually all who love America, I want to say thank you to George Will for telling us how to think about things and telling us and saying things we know, but we don't know the words to say. And so on behalf of and to you, our CPAC audience tonight, I present to you George Will, and I say to you, pay attention to this. George Will.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. For Cleta Mitchell to introduce a mere journalist is akin to having Franklin Roosevelt introduced by Harry Howe. I mean, this is disproportionate. Some year CPAC is going to come to its senses and have me introduce the most important conservative in Washington. For about 30 years, a political ensemble of actors and musicians called Capital Steps has been delivering to Washington political satire that is increasingly indistinguishable from public policy. At a recent performance of theirs, as the lights began to go down, a voice filled the auditorium in the Reagan building and said, "Please be seated and take note of the nearest exit, and in case of an emergency, remain seated and await your federal bailout." Ladies and gentlemen, when public policy has become a punchline, the nation has a problem and we have an opportunity. This is going to be a very good year, and what a difference a year does make. You saw just yesterday the issuing of the Mount Vernon Statement, just part of the ferment of conservative ideas that is underway. A great conservative, Samuel Johnson, once said, "People more often need to be reminded than instructed." And that's our case now. The American people need to be reminded of why we are conservatives, and we're getting an enormous assist in that from the Obama administration. How to think about the challenges ahead of us. Now, it would be a bold person to do what I am charged with doing, which is trying to tell a group as opinionated as this how to think about and present the real problems that we're facing now. But I propose to be, for about 20 minutes, as bold as the little first grader named Susie, who was in a class where the teacher said, "I want all of you children to draw a picture." And all the children set about doing it, and the teacher walked around the room, and she came to little Susie and said, "Susie, of what are you drawing a picture?" And Susie said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "Well, Susie, no one knows what God looks like." And Susie said, "They will in a few minutes." In my few minutes, I want to tell you how I think we can make our argument. The liberal conservative argument in our country is alive and well. It turns on the two polar values of Western political thought, freedom and equality, both important, always in tension, always being adjusted. Today, conservatives tend to stress freedom. They are therefore willing to accept greater disparities of social outcome, and they are inclined to regard the multiplication of entitlements and the mentality that it breeds as inimical to the attitudes and aptitudes essential for free citizens of a free society. Liberals today tend to stress equality, not equality of opportunity, but equality of outcome, and therefore they tend to regard the multiplication of entitlements and that entitlement mentality as enhancing the public good. Therefore, they are for spreading dependency. Dependency on government is not an unfortunate corollary of what they are advocating. It is their agenda. And it is that where we must take our stand. The retreat of the state, the wonderful retreat of the state that began in May 1979 with the election of Margaret Thatcher and accelerated in January 1981 with the inauguration of Ronald Reagan. The retreat of the state has been abruptly reversed to a point at which we are blurring to the point of erasure the distinction between the public and the private sectors. In the process, we are refusing to learn from the past. We are beginning to replicate many of the mistakes of the New Deal. Intelligent men and women of goodwill differ as to why the New Deal failed, but no one doubts that the New Deal failed at its primary objective, which was to put America back to work. Yet we're replicating its techniques. In September 1933, with hunger stalking the land and unemployment over 20%, the New Deal had a brainstorm, and that was to fiddle with demand in the agriculture sector and trigger a revival of the economy. They ordered the slaughter of 6 million pigs. We're smarter. We have cash for clunkers, whereby we spent $3 billion to move car purchases from September into August. All of which proves, as Mitch McConnell never tires of saying, that there is no education in the second kick of a mule. But look how the world has changed. 16 months ago, New York City was still the financial capital of the world. It's not even the financial capital of the United States. This town is. We have now something like state capitalism, in which capital, credit, the lifeblood of our economy, is increasingly treated as a public utility to be priced and allocated by political forces. Inevitably, this makes capital a slush fund, and inevitably, it funds crony capitalism. Much of this, we must face, ladies and gentlemen, began under a Republican administration. For example, with Detroit, where we pioneered, it was a Republican administration that began it, the lemon socialism of subsidizing failure. I don't know why the Bush administration felt so strongly about this. I think they were haunted by the searing memories of the continent-wide urban unrest and civil disorders that accompanied the bankruptcy of Studebaker. Today we have an administration that can envision a world without the internal combustion engine, but not a world without the Chrysler Corporation. What's wrong with this picture? Ronald Reagan said the rule in Washington is, if it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. When you finally get it to stop moving, subsidize it to get it moving again. That summarizes pretty much our policy. But what we have done with our passion to make more and more sectors of American society more and more dependent on this town is to short-circuit Milton Friedman's fundamental insight. He said we have a profit and loss system. The profit side is to incentivize risk-taking. The loss side is to punish reckless risk. When you break that, but Detroit is just the largest and most lurid and garish example of the dependency agenda. Let me go down the list. Very soon, the two most important decisions that an American family makes, to get a mortgage and to get a loan for college tuition, will both be conducted with a government monopoly. The cradle-to-grave aspiration of the welfare state marches on. One of the first things done in January 2009 that this administration did was to expand SCHIP, the State Children's Hospital Insurance Program, created by Republicans as a small program, and Republicans evidently thought it would stay small. It was for the working poor. Now that it has been expanded, families in some states with household incomes up to $125,000 a year are eligible for SCHIP. There is no reason to expand it this much other than to raise a generation of young Americans who consider getting their health care from government normal. Every day, ladies and gentlemen, every day for the next 2 decades, 10,000 more baby boomers will join the ranks of the Social Security and Medicare rolls every day. In this town, we have a school voucher program that serves 1,300 mostly poor, almost entirely minority students, enabling them to choose what a great many of the lawmakers in this town choose to do, which is send their children to private schools. The Democratic Party in Congress has worked tirelessly to extinguish this because they want these students to be dependent on the ramshackle plantation of public education in the city of Washington. There was no other reason to have a public option in the health care bill other than to try and drive out of competition all private providers. It was clearly a first step toward a single-payer system. Turn on your television at night. You are going to see competition all over your television screen between Progressive automobile insurance, arguing with Geico automobile insurance, arguing with State Farm automobile insurance. There is no reason in the world why we're not allowed to buy health insurance across state lines other than to increase our dependencies